G'day folks, welcome to this side-by-side comparison of Normandy 44 and The Dark Summer. Normandy 44 was first published in 2010 and designed by Mark Simonich and published by G&T Games. The second edition was published in 2015 and there's now a third printing of that second edition available on the G&T website. The Dark Summer is part of Ted Race's broader Dark series featuring the Dark Valley, Dark Sands and some other titles, and was published in 2021 by G&T Games. They are both brigade / divisional level representations of the Normandy campaign. They both have a very similar hex scale of about 2.5, 2.25 inches per hex. But there are some key differences which facilitate different styles of play. The Dark Summer is more towards the casual game end of the spectrum. A full game among two experienced players will take about 4 to 5 hours to play. Normandy 44 is more towards the simulation side of the spectrum. There is a lot more detail in the units and support elements involved, and a full game of this between two experienced players will take about 10 to 12, if not more, hours. The differences are really in the detail. Normandy 44 simply adds more detail to the units, to the rules, to the system of support and armor and all these kind of things, whereas the Dark Summer abstracts a lot of these elements. You have basically tank destroyers that you can add to any combat simply by adding the chit, or tac air that you can add to any combat. To be fair, it's the same in Normandy 44. The Dark Summer, though, also abstracts areas of the game board. So the whole city of Cherbourg and the Cherbourg defences are abstracted via a simple box in the Dark Summer, whereas in Normandy 44 you actually have to push into those the Cherbourg perimeter and the Cherbourg defences to capture the city. Another key difference here is that Normandy 44 runs until the end of June 1944 on a day-by-day basis. Each turn represents one day, whereas the Dark Summer, a full turn runs for about a week of the campaign, and this runs through until August 1944. The maps also cover different geographical areas. I mentioned that they are roughly the same scale, focusing on the invasions and the initial beaches, the area, much of the Cotentin Peninsula all the way out to Caen, but the Dark Summer also stretches the map further to the south to cover the broader breakout. There's a Brittany box which is abstracted, which American units can move into and then return far to the east to create, in effect, a Falaise pocket German units south of Caen. Normandy 44, however, really Falaise is the southernmost city on the map, right on the map's edge. So you don't get that broader campaign, and again, the chronology cuts off at the end of June 1944. So there's some of the key factors: chronology, turn basis, and level of detail, and what the maps cover. As a result of those differences, the two games play very differently. As I said, the Dark Summer is more a game you could potentially play in a single evening. You and an experienced friend could sit down, open this up and play it. It plays faster, so the downtime, in effect, for the inactive player is much reduced. Whereas in Normandy 44, because it is effectively an I go, you go system where the German player has their full turn and the Allied player has their full turn, there is a longer downtime and a lot more detail in those terms. The system of play is also vastly different. The Dark Summer uses a chit draw mechanism to activate either American forces, British forces, or German forces. The German player also has reaction chips that they can play after an Allied chip to respond to Allied movements. Whereas Normandy 44, as I said, is I go, you go. You do German movement, you do German combat, you do German supply, and then you shift to the Allied player turn and repeat. And you play that all out in full. So it's much more sequential. The combat is, despite all these differences, the combat is pretty similar. They both use pretty standard CRTs, but they're very different CRTs. As I found out through my plays of the Dark Summer, the CRT used in the Dark Summer is very attacker friendly. There are not many adverse combat results for the attacker. The worst that can happen is, as long as you can get onto the chart, is an attacker one-step loss. And this encourages the Allied player to be very aggressive. Keeping in mind the scale here, each turn covers, when I say turn, each turn is the full complement of chip draws. So it might be, for example, 3 American chip draws, 3 British chip draws, and something like 3 German chip draws. So potentially 9 to 13 chip draws over the course of a turn. That represents an entire week of campaigning. So the game certainly lends itself to aggressive action and broad maneuvers, and units have very high movement rates. Some of the, I believe it's the American armor, have movement rates of about 12, and they can move very rapidly across the map. Normandy 44, because it's focused just on June, and it cuts off at the end of June there, it's a slower grind through that bocage. There is more careful maneuvering of forces around the map. You're looking very carefully at building a main attacking force, and the precise movement of your armor and your divisions, keeping your divisions together, is far more precise and detailed in Normandy 44, whereas it's much looser in the Dark Summer. It's a bit more relaxed. You're not quite punished. You don't require that really critical detailed maneuvering of your formations. I mentioned these are sort of regimental brigade scale, but both sort of focus your attention on divisions. The Dark Summer, you tend to stack your units together as a division, whereas in Normandy 44 you tend to, because they have these rules around a main attacking force, the designated main attacking force, a division typically, functions at full strength. Main attacking force units participate at half strength. And so you're often thinking about getting a main attacking force together, getting a division together. And that can be difficult just because of the way the battle is spread out and you're grinding through this bocage. There's a lot more detail in Normandy 44 in the very similar maps, but Normandy 44 just has that little bit of extra detail in the terrain features and breakdown. Both, of course, are flooded with bocage, and Allied players will inevitably be very frustrated with bocage. In the Dark Summer, there are special terrain effects for bocage, wherein the German defender can effectively cancel DR results and treat DR asterisk results on the CRT as neutral step losses without a retreat. Whereas Normandy 44, it's not quite as punitive. The German player still has to retreat, but they can stop their retreat in the first bocage hex they get to, or town or woods or city. I mentioned in my review of the Dark Summer that I didn't like the way towns were handled. They're much more effective in Normandy 44, and a key difference here is that bocage is one of the most effective terrains in the Dark Summer, but towns are more effective than bocage often more effective than bocage in Normandy 44. It's a small point, but it kind of, given how core the bocage terrain is to the conduct of the Normandy campaign, the implementation of those terrain features is critical. Normandy 44 features a great series of rules around defender combat bonuses. So the defender, when they're under attack, they don't have to worry about support assets or anything. They simply add their terrain, defender combat bonus effects. Normandy 44 has a maximum of 18 attacking factors, and this means that the defender only needs to get 10 defending factors into a hex to ensure at most, a 1-to-1 odds. Whereas, in the Dark Summer, you're often very easily pushing up to very high odds for combat. There are other sort of more detailed rules in Normandy 44. There are rules for determined defense. There are more detailed rules on armor superiority and anti-tank. Now, of course, critical to the Normandy campaign was weather, and both games feature very interesting and engaging weather rules. In the Dark Summer, you have a series of weather chips, and these all go into a cup at the start of the campaign. Every turn, you'll draw out a weather chip, and it is permanently placed on the turn track. So there's only, for example, one storm weather chip, and once that's drawn, it is permanently out of the cup, and you'll never draw another storm. Normandy 44 is more random. You roll a die each turn to determine the weather. If you roll a 1, it's a storm turn, and you could potentially roll a 1 potentially 10 times in a row. Highly unlikely, but there could be 10 storm turns in a row. That simply cannot happen in the Dark Summer. So the Dark Summer does a good job of balancing out the weather. You know that over the course of the campaign, all these weather chips will be drawn, and the weather will be distributed in a random way, but you'll have the same distribution of weather effects over the course of the campaign. You don't get that equitable or constant distribution in Normandy 44. The last game I played, which I recorded live, had a predominance of overcast weather effects. The campaign was characterized by overcast weather. A few clear storms, a few storm turns, a few clear turns, a few storm turns, but a lot of overcast. So that's another key difference. The weather effects, both games have different weather effects, but they are more pronounced in the Dark Summer. The weather effects in particular determine what activation chips go into the cup. So as summarized on this player aid card, on a sun turn, the US player gets 4 move combats, the British get 2 move and 2 combat, the German player only gets 1 reaction chit. On a storm turn, however, the US get 2 move combat, the British get 1 move, 1 combat, and the German player gets 4 reactions. And those combined with other effects, so limited replacements for the Americans, plus various other rules. So German player can use artillery on storm turn, their movement cost is reduced, their movement cost is increased during sunny and cloudy turns. All these kind of weather effects are far more critical in the Dark Summer compared to the weather effects in Normandy 44. There are still some subtle weather effects, but it doesn't quite critically alter gameplay as it does in the Dark Summer. And indeed, I'd make that argument that the weather effects in the Dark Summer, things like a sunny turn, just stops German movements in their tracks, which is fascinating because, I mean, that's really what did happen historically around the Cotentin Peninsula. The Germans could not move, they could not reinforce, they could not move their forces around. And yeah, these weather effects really do reflect that and hamstring the Germans, stop their tracks in their tracks. What else? Look, if the games are different for different players. If you are more of a casual gamer, you might be leaning more towards the Dark Summer. If you're more interested in the history and the detail, if you're looking for a particular formation, maybe you want to look for Normandy 44. If you like the detailed rules, the detailed simulation, shift towards Normandy 44. If you want a more casual, relaxed gaming atmosphere, look at the Dark Summer. Having said that, because they cover different scopes, because the Dark Summer runs through until, again, August 1944, whereas Normandy is just about the first 3-4 weeks, there is scope for both of them on your shelf, and more, of course. It's over the past couple of weeks, a lot of people have been making comparison between the Dark Summer and Normandy 44. They are probably the two most similar games on the Normandy campaign, despite those differences that I've mentioned. But there are others as well. There's a D-Day Quad series by Decision Games. There is the Killing Ground Overlord by New England Simulations. There is, of course, Atlantic War, the old SPI version, which is very detailed, and the Decision Games version of Atlantic War, D-Day to Falaise by Decision Games, which is again very detailed. There is the Battle for Normandy by GMT Games as well. So there are many other options. These are what makes these probably two of the more popular titles, is the fact that they're both one mappers. They're both easy to get to the table, easy to set up, and easy to play, and have the most similar feel between the two. I'm certainly glad that I've got both of them. And in terms of which one I pull out next, probably depends on, I guess, how I'm going for time, how much I want to have this game set up, and how deep I want to dive into the rules. Hopefully, folks, that's given you some sense of the key differences between the Dark Summer and Normandy 44. Incidentally, two of my favourite games, war games of all time. They both do different things, and they both do what they strive to do very well. I think it's worth respecting the different objectives of the designers here and what they're trying to achieve. And yeah, as I said, certainly scope for both of these on your shelf. Thanks all.